Welcome, Dr. Sanchez and fellow students, to this graduate research project, Servant Leadership and the Impact It Has on Team Development, presented by Thomas Nations for Leadership and Team Development, Amerton University. Presentation Outline. The definition and characteristics of servant leadership, literature review, hypothetical statements, studies and research in servant leadership, impact of servant leadership on team development, and discussion. Defining servant leadership. The concept of servant leadership was primarily inspired by a character in Hermann Hesse's work, The Journey to the East, written in 1956. The character is a servant who does minor tasks for a group during their journey, provides joy for their soul through his melodies. The servant had such an impact on the group that when he is lost, the group eventually loses hope and leaves the journey. This book led Robert Greenleaf to write the foundational piece on servant leadership. Robert Greenleaf, who is now considered a grandfather of servant leadership and established the early writings about servant leadership, identified it as having a desire within oneself to serve, which prompts the individual to lead with purpose and care for the greater good of others. Characteristics of servant leadership. There are 10 characteristics that Northouse points to, given to us by Greenleaf. Listening, the discussion that goes on with a leader and followers that is an engaged process of communicating, giving, and taking messages, also understood as talking and listening. Empathy, placing oneself in the position of the other individual by looking at things from their perspective and trying to relate to life how they do. Healing, to heal is to be made complete, is the perspective where the servant leader is concerned for the health and wholeness of their follower. Awareness deals with being in tune with the physical, social, and political surroundings and comprehending the impact a person has on oneself and others. Persuasion, specific and continual communication with an individual that prompts them to transition. Characteristics of servant leadership continued. Conceptualization. This deals with a person's capacity to clarify the purpose and orientation. Foresight. The ability to understand what hasn't yet happened and being able to distinguish what will happen based on what has already occurred in conjunction with what is presently happening. Stewardship, taking responsibility for the leadership role entrusted to the leader. Commitment to the growth of people, to be able to help every person in the team grow personally and professionally. Building community, creating an environment for community where everyone is part of the group and has an important role to play. A literature review of several research studies will be provided. A systematic literature review of servant leadership theory in organizational context by D. Perez and J. W. Peachy, 2013. The objective to analyze empirical studies related to servant leadership through interaction with a model of populace for the purpose of evaluating and incorporating the structure, conclusions, and influence of servant leadership. The method. A focused effort to study peer-reviewed articles from 2004 to 2011 was done utilizing the search term servant leadership, which produced 381 articles. After duplicates were taken out, 255 articles were then scrutinized to isolate articles that met specific parameters as it relates to servant leadership. Ultimately, 39 empirical studies were examined having met all the specified requirements. The results. This review made 4 primary discoveries, which include 1. Not having agreement on the meaning of servant leadership. 2. Servant leadership is a topic being researched worldwide in various manners. 3. Multiple measures are being utilized. And 4. Servant leadership is a feasible ideology. The other article, The Functions of a Servant Leader, by M.F. Coetzer, M. Busson, and M. Gowden-Hughes, 2017. The objective: identify a structure that encapsulates the behavior of a servant leader in a purposeful manner after analyzing writings on servant leadership. The method: a systematic literature review of 87 articles was utilized to answer specific questions regarding servant leadership relating to its method, capabilities, and assessments. Results: servant leadership is examined globally while determined by various means and found to be connected positively to personal, group, and associational conclusions. It has been determined there is still no agreement on identifying the different traits, capabilities, or assessments of servant leadership. It is a trustworthy method of leadership which can be identified among other methods. The hypothetical statements for this study. The hypothesis 1, servant leadership will strengthen team development within an organization as retention of employees grows. Hypothesis 2, stronger empirical data on servant leadership will make it primary leadership style for organizations. Studies in servant leadership. The influence of servant leadership on restaurant employee engagement, by D. Carter and T. Baghurst, 2014. The objective: to collectively investigate servant leadership from the viewpoint of workers. The method: to work in focus groups with tenured partners, also known as employees, of Celebration Restaurant, which operates under servant leadership in order to better understand the effect of servant leadership has on their work. Results: servant leadership had a powerful impact on partner involvement, especially with responsibility, devotion, partnership, and long-term partners who commit to the achievement of the business. Peer-to-peer involvement showed greater strength than the manager-to-employee relationship did, which is not normally the case when studying servant leadership. Limitations of this study: potential bias, limited information from focus groups, and potential breach of confidentiality. And also, this was a very small group. The impact of servant leadership and subordinates, organizational tenure on trust and leader attitude, by Simon C.H. Chan and W. Mack, 2014. The objective: examine the connection between servant leadership workers' confidence and leader and job contentment, and whether subordinates' organizational tenure restrained the outcome. The method: a measured questionnaire survey was used to gather information from 218 employees in a service-oriented exclusive organization in the People's Republic of China. The result: the discovery determined that trust and leader bought agreement in the relationship between servant leadership and subordinates, job contentment. Also, the definite outcome of servant leadership on workers' confidence in employer and job contentment was more distinct for short tenure subordinates than for long tenure subordinates. The role of servant leadership in fostering inclusive organizations, by G. Gotsis and K. Grimani, 2016. The objective: to establish an incorporating structure of servant leadership and workers' understanding of inclusion. The method. A hypothetical type obtaining the result of servant leadership in forming atmospheres for inclusion is developed. Results. Servant leaders can implement inclusive measures to reduce the amount of discrimination shown in the workplace. Servant Leadership and Conflict Resolution, a qualitative study by R. Jit, C.S. Sharma, and M. Kawatra, 2016. The objective: to identify the types of conflict management strategies chosen by servant leaders. The method: adhere to the method of chronological analysis within the structure of analytical philosophical investigation to grasp the everyday occurrences as lived. Results: the study advocates that the servant leader's primary method for managing disagreements are more compelling, benevolent, and engaging. Their key methods for settling employee-to-employee disagreements are primary analysis of the problem, leaders' mediation in finding an agreeable solution, and neutrality of administrator while accomplishing settlement of the disagreement. Examination of the problematic circumstance, self-control, diligence, endurance, and humbleness of the servant leader have surfaced as primary leadership components, as well as approaches for handling any challenging employee conduct. Servant Leadership and Serving Culture, Influence on Individual and Unit Performance by R.C. Lydon, S.J. Wayne, C. Lau, and Jeremy Muser, 2014. The objective was refined and proved a standard alleging that servant leaders transmit servant leadership actions in associations with followers by designing a serving lifestyle, which precisely determines unit, in essence, restaurant, store, achievement, and improves individual thoughts and actions openly and through the mediating influence of individuals' recognition with the unit. The method. General managers and hourly employees from 76 restaurants, which was 34% of the chain's total restaurants, were invited to participate in surveys. 93% of the general managers and 1,143, 71% of employees responded to the shortened version of the servant leadership scale, which consisted of 7 questions which covered the 7 dimensions of servant leadership. The result. Through an in-depth study associating information accumulated from a variety of sources, the review has expanded the advancement of servant leadership theory. Results provide assurance for role modeling and social identity theories as primary interpretive instruments based on the testimony that serving culture and worker recognition with the store were related to outcomes of interest. The relationship between servant leadership, organizational citizenship behavior, and team effectiveness by B. Mahimbe and A. Engelbrecht, 2014. The objectives. 1. Administer an examination of the connection among servant leadership, organizational citizenship behavior, and school team effectiveness. 2. Approve a hypothetical model explaining the basic connections between these factors in the South African school system. The method. A non-probability sample of 288 instructors was taken from 38 institutions in the Western Cape in South Africa. Item analysis and confirmatory factor analysis were implemented to the information. The result. Decisive connections were discovered among servant leadership, team effectiveness, and organizational citizenship behavior. How does servant leadership affect employees' attitudes, behaviors, and psychological climates in a for-profit organizational context? By A. Ozelmaz and S.S. Sisek, 2015. The objective: analyze the outcome of servant leadership on worker mindset, actions, and cognitive mood. The method. In Study 1, the empirical results are based on data for 284 employees from 12 different organizations. And in Study 2, the results are based on data for 286 employees from 15 different organizations. The results. Servant leadership is emphatically and substantially correlated to organizational citizenship behavior and job contentment and cognitive mood. The connection between servant leadership and job satisfaction is also partially mediated by cognitive mood. With these results, this study contributes to research showing that leadership has both specific and mediating outcomes on workers' mindsets and actions. Servant leadership and the effect of the interaction between humility, action, and hierarchical power on follower engagement by M. Souza and D. Verandrant, 2017. The objective: identify how an unassuming mindset of being of service influence a servant leader's capacity to inspire confident response. Method. Through a three-way moderation model, a study was administered based on a sample of 232 individuals working in a diverse range of organizations. The result? The primary discovery is that unassuming leaders demonstrated the maximum effect on employees' commitment despite their hierarchical status. Leaders who are not as unassuming and in a lesser role hierarchical position seem to be able to make up for that through a determined action-oriented leadership method. Significantly for leaders in upper hierarchical roles, the moral virtue of humility appears to enhance the effect of their action-oriented leadership the most. Impact of student leadership on team development. Servant leadership and team performance, the mediating role of knowledge sharing climate by C. Song, K.R. Park, and S. Kang, 2015. Goal: to confirm that servant leadership will have a decisive impact on knowledge sharing climate within an association. The method: study information taken by surveys from 67 teams comprising 1,884 direct sales representatives of a large cosmetics company in South Korea and were analyzed at the team level. The result: servant leadership was discovered to be substantially connected with team performance, identifying continuous relationship between antecedent and outcome variables. Knowledge sharing climate was also definitely identified with team performance and mediated the relationship between servant leadership and team performance. Impact of student leadership on team development. A systematic literature review of servant leadership theory in organizational context by D. Paris. Within this study, 16 empirical studies explored servant leadership theory at a unit level. Overall, these studies found that a servant-led organization enhances leader trust and organizational trust, organizational citizenship behavior, procedural justice, team and leader effectiveness, and the collaboration between team members. Discussion. Servant leadership hits across every aspect of society. By looking at these different research studies, it can be seen that servant leadership is in the process of being utilized or researched across the world. Whether it's in South Africa, where they're studying the role of principals and teachers, or in Texas, where they're at the Celebration restaurant. Servant leadership can be seen in a variety of locations, touching a variety of lives. Servant leadership is structured in such a way that it is unique, where the servant is the leader, and the process of building up the individuals within the team, being there as a support, helping them, guiding them, is what makes it so attractive. This student believes that student that servant leadership will continue to grow and have more and more impact. From the studies that were presented, team development is also an important role that is in play. As a team of a sport, everybody's working together, and the coach is on the sideline, giving plays, giving encouragement in some aspects, not giving encouragement. But in the workplace, in the work environment, the role of the uh, employer, the leader, the manager, in a servant mindset, they are there to help the team to get to where they are wanting to get to, whether it's giving them advice, whether it is sitting down and guiding them, helping them to see how to get from point A to point B, being aware of their circumstances, being aware of the situation. And in the articles, how the team has become tighter, uh, how those individuals who have just come into an environment are more likely to stay than those that have been in the environment for a longer time, according to the studies. So, team development will continue to grow in this student's mindset because as the servant leader is able to engage with the people he or she manages, then that ability to connect will be beneficial across the board, and the team will find their place, they will find their role, they will find success, and they will continue to grow. And ultimately, those servant leaders will develop servant leaders. A good example of this from the perspective of the Bible is 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul is speaking to Timothy. And the things that you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will also be able to teach others. That's just an example of a man that was raising up another man, not only to take his place, because he wasn't going to be here on earth much longer, but also showing him the importance of taking on a role. When considering servant leadership and considering its foundations, uh, this student was thinking about the book that Greenleaf used as a foundation piece. Through looking at the research and through this student's own perspective, servant leadership has been around for a very long time. Maybe it didn't have a title, maybe it didn't have that label, but if you look at religion overall and you start trying to find out, is service tied to any particular religion, you can easily find that servantship or service can be tied to Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and it goes beyond that. From this student's perspective, since I'm more familiar with Christianity as a faith, Jesus Christ stands out as a servant leader. And one may say, well, how can you use that as an example? Well, the literature that has been written that is called the Bible was written over a span of time. It is connected together, 66 books, 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New Testament, but there's a cohesiveness between the books. This student's opinion is that within those books, the life of Christ is not only foretold, but also presented in the Gospels. In some of the literature, for example, in the Functions of a Servant Leader by M. Kreutzer, M. Busen, and M. Geldenhuis, it is observed that Jesus himself pointed out in Mark the concept of what it is to be a servant. So in Mark 10:42 through 45, one can find Jesus said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be a slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." You may or may not agree with the concept of Christ as a servant leader, but the evidence can be found that he did render service while he was on earth. And in fact, his servants, also known as his disciples, rendered service while they were here on earth. They wrote pieces of the New Testament, and then they lived their lives in such a way that they died as martyrs, following in the footsteps of their Lord Jesus Christ. So their service was learned by a servant leader. In regard to how servant leadership will continue to grow, I think the student thinks that the evidence is available and significant enough that more leaders will look to servant leadership as a primary choice. The two literature reviews provide ample information that more research needs to be done. An agreement on what servant leadership is by definition and by characteristics needs to be nailed down, because that was pointed out by both studies that was lacking. But once those types of things are fine-tuned and the research continues to grow, then servant leadership will find its place and will continue to be an excellent option for leaders.